Okay, so you want to own a tower crane rental company. Massive steel giants towering over city skylines. Construction firms paying tens of thousands of dollars a month just to keep one running, and your equipment doing the heavy lifting while checks roll in every single month. A capital equipment business that essentially rents out gravity-defying machines to desperate contractors. Sounds simple. It is not simple. Here's the problem. Almost none of that is how this business actually works, and by the end of this, you'll understand why tower crane rental is one of the most capital-punishing, logistically brutal businesses in construction, despite cranes looking like the most expensive, most essential piece of equipment on any job site. Let's start with the entry fee, because you don't just buy a crane and park it somewhere. A single new tower crane, depending on its lifting capacity and jib length, typically costs $1.2 million to $4 million. And a genuine rental business needs a fleet, not one machine, because a single crane sitting idle between contracts generates zero revenue, while every cost keeps accruing. A modest starting fleet of 5 to 8 cranes represents $8 million to $25 million in equipment alone, and that number doesn't include the specialized transport trucks and heavy-haul trailers required to move disassembled crane components between job sites, which run $300,000 to $700,000 per rig, or the mobile assist cranes needed to erect and dismantle your tower cranes at each new site, another $400,000 to $900,000 apiece. Add a maintenance facility with the overhead cranes, diagnostic equipment, and certified inspection tools required to service equipment this large, and you're looking at another $2 million to $5 million before you've signed your first rental contract. Most operators finance 70 to 80% of the fleet through specialized equipment lenders, leaving an equity check of $3 million to $8 million in cash before a single crane has lifted a single load. Here's the first trap almost nobody sees coming. Tower cranes require certified operators, riggers, and a dedicated maintenance technician for every active unit. And in most jurisdictions, you're legally required to provide a qualified operator as part of the rental package, rather than simply handing over the equipment, meaning your labor costs scale directly with every crane you deploy, not just with your total fleet size. A certified tower crane operator commands $90,000 to $140,000 annually in salary and benefits depending on your market, and losing one mid-contract because of injury, licensing lapse, or a competitor poaching them with a signing bonus can leave an active crane sitting idle while you scramble to find a replacement, all while the client's construction schedule and their patience with your invoices keeps ticking. Now let's talk about what happens after you actually start renting cranes. Because the operating bleed on a tower crane fleet is relentless, in a way that catches new operators completely off guard. Insurance for equipment this size, given the catastrophic liability exposure if a crane fails or drops a load in a dense urban environment, runs $8,000 to $15,000 per crane per month, meaning a fleet of 6 cranes can cost $576,000 to $1.08 million annually in insurance alone. Transportation and rigging costs to move, assemble, and disassemble a single crane at each new job site run $80,000 to $180,000 per relocation, a cost many first-time operators badly underestimate because it has to be paid whether the contract runs 6 months or 18. Preventive maintenance and parts, mandated by strict safety inspection regimes and manufacturer service schedules, cost $40,000 to $90,000 per crane annually. Certified operator and rigger wages across an active fleet easily reach $700,000 to $1.1 million a year. Here's the economic reality that will define your entire career in this business. Your equipment sits enormously expensive and largely idle between the moment a contract ends and the moment you land the next one, and that dead time, unlike almost any other rental business, can stretch for months because tower crane demand is entirely tied to the boom and bust cycle of large-scale construction starts. Here's the part the passive income dream skips entirely, and it's the part that actually explains why this business exists in the first place. A tower crane rental company does not primarily profit from the monthly rental rate on the crane itself. It profits from the relocation, assembly, and disassembly fees bundled around every contract, fees that most clients don't fully appreciate until they've signed, because those fees generate margins the base rental rate alone could never achieve. Understand this, and you understand why sophisticated operators fight harder over contract length and site logistics than over the headline rental price. On a typical monthly rental of $45,000 to $65,000 for a mid-sized tower crane, after operator wages, insurance allocation, and maintenance reserves, the actual margin is often just 12 to 18%, a number that looks thin relative to the eye-watering sticker price of the equipment itself. The real profit engines are elsewhere. Mobilization and demobilization fees, charged separately from monthly rent and covering the transport, assembly, and disassembly of the crane at the start and end of every contract, can generate 60 to 75% margins because the labor and equipment involved are largely fixed costs you already own outright. Climbing fees, charged every time a crane needs to be raised as a building grows taller, generate similarly strong margins on relatively short, contained work. And short notice or urgent deployments, where a contractor's existing crane fails or a schedule accelerates unexpectedly, command premium pricing that ordinary scheduled rentals never touch. The tower crane standing over the skyline is the product on the surface. The mobilization fees and climbing charges underneath are the real business. Now let's follow one typical crane contract and see where the actual profit accumulates. A construction firm rents a mid-sized tower crane for an 8-month project at $55,000 a month, generating $440,000 in gross rental revenue. Operator wages, insurance allocation, and maintenance reserves for that crane over 8 months consume roughly $340,000, leaving just $100,000 in base rental margin, an unremarkable 23%. But mobilization and assembly at the start of the contract generates $95,000 in fees against maybe $30,000 in actual cost. And demobilization at the end adds another $85,000 in fees against similarly modest cost. 2 mid-project climbing operations as the building rises add another $40,000 in high-margin fee revenue. The contract that looked like it generated a modest $100,000 in rental margin actually produced closer to $260,000 in total profit once every fee is accounted for, more than double what the headline rental rate alone suggested. So let's run 2 versions of the same tower crane rental company and see how differently this can play out. In the optimistic scenario, your fleet of 6 cranes maintains 85% utilization across the year as regional construction activity stays strong, contracts run their full expected length without early termination, and mobilization and climbing fees perform as projected across every deployment. Annual gross revenue reaches roughly $8.2 million. After debt service on the fleet, operator wages, insurance, transportation, and maintenance totaling $6.4 million, you're clearing approximately $1.8 million in annual profit, and steady utilization lets you begin planning fleet expansion into a 7th and 8th crane to capture additional regional demand. Now here's the realistic scenario. Using the exact same fleet, the exact same starting assumptions, rising interest rates trigger a regional slowdown in large-scale commercial construction starts, and 2 of your 6 cranes sit idle for 4 months between contracts, generating 0 rental revenue, while insurance, storage, and baseline maintenance costs continue regardless. A 3rd crane's contract terminates 3 months early when the developer pauses the project over financing issues. A common occurrence you have limited legal recourse against, beyond contractual penalty clauses that rarely cover your full lost revenue. Meanwhile, a certified operator on your largest crane is injured on an unrelated job, and finding and certifying a qualified replacement takes 6 weeks, during which that crane sits idle despite an active contract waiting for it. Annual gross revenue falls to just $5.1 million, but your fixed costs, debt service on equipment that doesn't stop depreciating, insurance on idle cranes, and baseline staffing barely change regardless of utilization. That $1.8 million optimistic profit doesn't just shrink. It becomes a $900,000 annual loss, and you're now negotiating with your equipment lenders about payment deferrals, while 2 of your most expensive assets sit motionless on a storage lot, generating nothing but depreciation and insurance premiums. The operators who actually survive and thrive in this business long-term aren't the ones who built the biggest fleet or chased the tallest, most impressive projects. They're the ones who negotiated contract terms with meaningful early termination penalties that actually cover lost revenue, who cross-trained multiple certified operators per crane to eliminate single-person dependency risk, who diversified their client base across residential, commercial, and infrastructure construction, so no single sector's downturn could ground their entire fleet simultaneously. And who priced mobilization and climbing fees as the genuine profit centers they are, rather than negotiating them away to win contracts on headline rental rate alone? A tower crane rental company, at the end of the day, isn't really a business that rents steel and hydraulics to contractors. It's a labor-intensive logistics and risk management operation wrapped around extraordinarily expensive equipment, where the contract terms and operator redundancy planning built years before a construction downturn ever hits decide who actually survives long enough to see the fleet through to real, sustained profitability.